Hello everyone. In this tutorial, we're going to cover how to create grass in the Maya environment. Now, there are several ways of creating grass in the 3D environment. We could utilize what are called paint effects, which is one way, not the way I would advise for you to populate your entire scene. And then there's another way using XGen, the XGen engine. So in order to cover both of them, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create grass from the very beginning by using paint effects. And then we will utilize what I create through paint effects to populate through the XGen engine. So let's get started. I am going to create a plane, and I'm going to cover my grid area. As I've done in class in the past, I usually try to make this even to my grid area. So I make it 24 by 24 and I create 24 subdivisions. Now this is not necessary, but in order for you to create, to populate your environment, you need to have enough subdivisions on whatever surface you will be applying the grass effect. So with this done, 24 by 24 seems sufficient for me. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a duplicate of this, so Control D to duplicate, or Apple D, and I am going to move this duplicate 1 unit up on my y-axis. I'm going to make sure that my previous one that I created, the one below, is at the 0, 0, 0 point, so I'm going to place it there. Now this is just me being picky. You don't have to have it at the 0, 0, 0 point. You can place your geometry whatever you want. As long as you do the steps and have enough geometry, enough polygons for you to be able to apply the grass onto this, or whatever paint effect you're creating. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the copy, the one that's above it, and I am going to go to the Generate dropdown, and I am going to make it paintable. Now what that does is it tags this specific surface to be a surface that will receive a paint effect. That paint effect that we will be using is called is the grass brush. Basically, we're just gonna draw grass through a brush on the surface of this plane. So what we'll do is we'll go to the Generate dropdown again, and I am gonna get a brush to be able to paint what I want to paint. In that brush, you'll see there are plenty of paint effect brushes that you can utilize, and these will all give you the different geometry for the different objects that are showcased within the name. So if you want to create, say for example, fur, you will have, or let's say food elements. There's food elements that you can simply paint on. Flowers. So basically, there's different types of geometry that has already been pre-designed for you that you can go ahead and paint on top of the surface. In our case, we're going for grass, so I'll go to grasses, and I am going to select this grass ornament. That is the format that I will be using, the type of grass that I want to create. And I can now close this window. You'll notice that as I go on top of my surface, I get the little red brush that we get when we use the brush tool. And as such, I can increase by pressing the B key and left mouse clicking and dragging. I can increase the size of my brush or decrease the size of my brush by moving left or right. Now, if I make my brush big, the size of the grass will be gigantic. If I make it small, it will be small, and the smallest, basically, you control the size of whatever you're drawing based on the size of that brush. I'm going for a fairly small brush, something like this, and I'm trying to aim to place it smack in the center of my plane. So I'll go ahead and click on that polygon, and I'll start painting, and as I draw with my brush, you'll see that I'm drawing what appears to be grass. So I'll place it all in the center area of my plane. Let me go ahead and zoom in so that you get truck in so you can actually see what this is. Let me change my tool to the move tool so that I don't paint anymore, and you'll notice that I have created blades of grass, or what looks like blades of grass. Now in the preview mode, they look very papery, and that's something we can always fix afterwards. Now there's plenty of grass here, so I actually drew a bit too much. Let me undo that, and let me go back in again. Generate, get brush, go back to my brushes. I'll use grasses this time again, same grass, and I will paint just about that much. That should be sufficient. That's more than enough, I believe. Perhaps some in here so that I don't end up with any holes on my grass, and that's plenty. So with this done, let me go ahead and switch my tool again to the selection tool so that I deselect everything, and that's the grass that I will be using to populate the area. Now you'll notice on my outliner that I have now what appears to be two grass elements that I've created. This is geometry, and if you'll notice, it's very low polygon count, which is good because it won't disrupt your rendering time. Now what I'll do with that is I will go ahead and turn those two into polygons. So what I'll do is I'll select them, and then I'll go modify, convert paintbrush to polygons, paint effects to polygons. Now you can go to your options and modify as you require per whatever scene you're working on. In my case, I'll leave them as they are, and I'll simply click convert. Now when I click convert, you'll notice that I end up with the two elements as polygons. And with those done, I'll go ahead and select them both again, and I'll combine them. So I'll say mesh combine so that they become one single piece of geometry. Now with that one selected, the latest version, I'll go ahead and remove all history. So I'll go edit, delete by type, history, and that clears any attachment that geometry had to either the paintbrush that I used to create it or to any of the groupings that I had before. So now I can go ahead and delete that copy of the plane that I had created to draw this grass, and I'll go ahead and utilize that grass as my base grass. Basically, that's my object. So you'll notice that it's slightly elevated from the floor. What I want to do is I want to make sure, number one, that this is on the plane, and second, that it is in the center of the world. So what I'll do is you'll notice that by grouping it, I sent my pivot point to the center of the world, but my grass is sort of floating above that plane. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and modify my pivot by centering to the grass, and then while pressing the V key on the keyboard, V as in Victor, I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and move I'll snap to that center of the world, and then I'll go ahead and move it slightly up. Just make sure that it's slightly above my ground, not completely above. It can be touching it, but it should be roughly close to it so that you don't get any spacing. So this works really well. And now what I need to do is couple of things. The first thing is I need to create a light, and the second thing I need to do is I need to create a camera. Now the reason why I want a camera is because the effect that we're about to apply, the generate element that we're about to do, will populate based on the visual area of the camera. Whatever is within the field of view of the camera is what will be populated by the effect that we're about to create. So usually if you have a scene that you're framing, basically it will create grass within that field of view. Everything else outside of that field of view will not be populated by any of the geometry that you're creating. This is in order for you to save rendering time, number one, and so that your geometry does not get out of hand. So basically, because what we're about to do will multiply the amount of geometry. So with that in mind, let me go ahead and go to my rendering shelf, and I'll create a camera. Let me bring that camera back to this end over here. Bring it up slightly. Now let me look through that camera. So I'll switch my view, and then I'll organize so that I can actually see what I'm doing. This works well. Let me zoom out slightly a little bit. And that's good. So with that position for the camera, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a light, and I can create either a Arnold light, or I can create a regular light like a skylight or a directional light to illuminate the entire scene. So I'll create a directional light in this case. So you can see it's being created. Let me rotate it so that it's illuminating from the side and down. So let me just get that out of the way so that it's not on the way of what we're about to do. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this plane. Now with the plane selected, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the generate drop down at the top. And I am going to create what is called a description. And basically this is your XGen engine now that is going to multiply whatever geometry we apply to the plane in a way that you can control in order to populate large areas with the same geometry. So that I'll click on create description, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the word grass. I'm going to call this one grass B. I ran a test before I recorded this video, so I have a grass A description somewhere already. And then I'm going to change this collection also to grass B underscore. And the one thing to make sure you change is that you're going to be using custom geometry for what you're about to create. So we'll click on custom geometry. That is the only modification that we're going to do to this element right here. And then we'll click create. Now what this is going to do is going to create an XGen archive, and this archive basically is what you control through the new XGen tab. You'll notice that there is an XGen tab on the right hand side, right where your attributes are. There's a new tab called XGen. This is a fairly complicated, not really complicated, it's a really busy tab. I suggest that you go and take a look at the different elements within it, the different attributes, because there's a lot of control that you can have over the geometry that you're working on. And you'll find your way through it fairly easy, because most of these things we've already covered in class. Things such as length, width, depth, tilt, twist, all these are things that you should recognize from the formers and from the things that we did in geometry in the class. Now there are some areas here where you can actually code, and we're going to do a bit of code in just a second. But before we head down in that direction, let's go ahead and go to the preview output tab and go ahead and switch your renderer from none to Arnold. We're going to be rendering in Arnold, so let's make sure we switch that. That's one thing. And then let's go back to primitives and scroll down to where we're going to be applying the archive. Now we don't have an archive. The archive that we're going to be using is going to be this grass, the element that we created. So we'll select it, and what we'll do is we'll go ahead and say create from selection. Now this one we will save somewhere. This folder XGen archives does not exist, so this is something that you will have to create within whatever project you're working on. So in my case, I've already created a new project for the lecture for next week, and I created the XGen folder and the archives folder inside it. Now you can change the name of the archive to something like grass, and if you're testing, I would suggest you do a grass_1, grass_ or grass A, grass B, something like that, so that you can identify the different archives and then utilize the one that closest resembles what you're trying to create. So I'll rename that grass A, make sure that I am in the proper folder and that my path is pointing to my project, and then I'll go ahead and click on export. This is going to say, do you need to save the scene? And I'll do it, and as soon as it does that, it's going to go and create this. This takes about a minute to do or less. So I'm going to stop here for just a second while this is being built. So I'll click save, and well, I haven't saved this scene. Sorry, my apologies. I need to save the scene, so I'm going to go into my scenes, and I'm going to create a new grass B this time. Grass B. And I'll click save as. There you go. And it's going to start saving, and I'll stop right now and I'll come back. Alrighty, so it seems like the thing just completed. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hide that geometry. So I'll go to the channel box and turn off the visibility for it. Then I'll go back to my XGen, and now I'm going to add that archive that I just created. So I'll click add, and then I'll go into the archive folder, which should be inside my XGen folder, and there it is, grass A XARC is the archive name. I'll click open, and this is going to say the archive has materials associated with it. If we had saved, I made the mistake of not saving a material when I created the brush, but if you save one, you can actually apply a material to it, and we can actually do that post the fact that we've created this. So I'll click yes on this, and you'll notice that the entire area is populated with grass. Now if I zoom out slightly, or if I tilt, if I pan, you'll notice that there will be areas that are empty in the corners. And that is the area that the camera was not looking at while I was rendering. You'll also notice that my machine is slowing down, and that's because there's quite a lot of geometry going on the scene right now. So several things we need to do to this. It looks very even, so almost like a pattern. So I need to randomize the positioning of the grass, and I need to also lower the density of the grass. So what I'll do is I'll scroll up on my XGen window, XGen window, and I'll go ahead and reduce my density to, let's say, 0.5. And you'll start seeing some spacing between the grass, so that might be a bit too low. You can play with this. If I go down all the way to 0.1, my grass turns into patches. If I go to 0.7, perhaps, that covers pretty much fairly well. So I'll go with that, 0.7. That's a good number for me. That gives me some variety. As you know, grass sometimes has spaces in between it, between the blades, so that gives you that ability. If you really want the entire thing to be covered, then you can go to 1 and keep the density. Now let's worry about the actual variance. We need to make sure that this is not as even as it shows right now. It almost shows like it's in rows and in columns. So what I'll do is I am going to change the length, width, and depth of this. Let me click on the little swatch to the right of length, and I am going to replace this code here with the word RAND, and then I'm going to open up a parenthesis, and I am going to enter two values, 0.5, comma 1.5. Let me explain what this is. Basically what I'm saying here is pick a random value per blade or per patch between 0.5 of density and of size and 1.5 of size. Now the size is the original size of whatever we created. The original paintbrush that we created, that's the size at which things are being created. 1 being the value of whatever the original size of that was. You create the size of that per the size of the brush when you're using the paint effect. So if you make the brush really, really small, then you're going to have small grass. If you make it big, you're going to get bigger blades of grass. So you control that in that area. Now here we're basically utilizing that information, whatever size we determined to be the 1 value when we create it, and we're saying please make it anywhere between half of its size and 1.5 times its size. And by just doing that one value, randomizing that value, by the way, let me go ahead and select that and copy it, Control C or Apple C, and then I'm just going to click apply. You'll notice that right away I have variance in my grass. It's starting to look different. Now every time I re-render this, it will populate based on my position of my camera. So if I have my camera only pointing to one corner, everything else will be empty. So you can change that, basically the amount of grass per the position of the camera. Let me go ahead and change the value for width as well. I'll select this entire thing and replace with that. I'll accept. There you go. And then I'll click on this one, select that, apply, accept. And you'll notice that now I have what looks like randomized grass. Now let's take a quick look at this and see what this renders like in Arnold. And I'm going to do an IPR preview of this really quick. You'll notice that we have, doesn't look too hot because it's gray, but we can always apply a material to this. So let me go ahead and close this render, and I'm going to delete the light that we currently have, and I'm going to use an Arnold light. I'm going to use a sky dome just with this default lighting values. Let me render now with the sky dome, and you'll see that you actually will get to see the blades of grass. So this picked up the color that we had originally saved with the grass. So if I go to my outliner and I select the grass ornament, the polygonal object that we created, and I go to its attributes, you will notice that if I go under the materials, it actually has a material attached to it, and it's a simple ramp material, heavy ramp material that defines the color of the grass. You could actually replace this with a map. So if you want to have like realistic grass, although this looks pretty good, you might want to have realistic grass. And if you want to work with that, if you want to create that, then you can definitely replace this map with an actual image. So I hope this gives you basically a response to the question on how to create grass and to how to populate large areas with materials with geometry in a really quick way. I hope you can apply them to your models.